When currencies die, they don't go out with sirens. They fade, quietly, invisibly. Then all at once, look closely. The dollar bill, that green symbol of American power, is flaking at the edges. Not from war, not from revolution. From something softer, slower, more dangerous. From a loss of faith. When empires fall, it's rarely with explosions. Sometimes they just stop being trusted. Here's the paradox. The world still runs on the US dollar. Trade, debt, oil, sanctions, security, dependence everywhere. Confidence, not so much. What if this collapse isn't a single day on a calendar? What if it's a long, slow unraveling that began decades ago? A quiet breach in the foundation that we learned to live with, until the cracks reached the surface. To understand what's happening now, you have to go back to the moment when money stopped meaning what it used to mean. The moment the anchor was cut loose, and the tide began to pull everything with it. Pause and think about that. Let's rewind to when the dollar wasn't just paper, but a promise. And promises were kept in gold. After World War II, the world limped out of the rubble desperate for order. Currencies were broken. Trade was fractured. Trust was scarce. So in 1944, representatives from 44 nations gathered in a quiet New Hampshire resort to build a financial system that wouldn't fall apart again. Bretton Woods. The blueprint was elegant. Peg every major currency to the US dollar. Peg the dollar to gold. $35 per ounce. Clear. Fixed. Non-negotiable. Why the dollar? Because the United States held the world's gold and the world's factories. 2/3 of global reserves sat in American vaults. The dollar wasn't just paper. It was a claim check on real metal. Imagine being a German exporter selling cars to Americans. You earned dollars. But those dollars were convertible into gold bars. Japan's central bank could trade dollars for bullion, on demand. The promise was literal, not poetic. The result? Stability. Trade flourished. Investment surged. Nations could plan years ahead because money had an anchor. Confidence was not a mood. It was policy. The dollar became the bloodstream of global commerce, pumping reliability through a world that had forgotten the feeling. And for a while it worked, beautifully, but promises are easy to make when you're rich in gold, and easier to break when you spend more than you have. By the 1960s, the United States was living two lives, winning hearts and minds abroad, building a great society at home, and paying for both, with printed promises. For every bomb dropped in Vietnam, more dollars. For every new program launched, more dollars. Deficits widened. The printing press hummed. Confidence stayed winner for a while. Then the math showed up. By 1970, foreign governments and central banks held more than $50 billion in US dollars, but the United States had only about $11 billion in gold. Do the numbers. If even a fraction asked for conversion, the vaults would empty. It was a bank run waiting for a knock at the door. Charles de Gaulle didn't knock. He demanded. France sent ships to claim gold for its dollars and called America's setup an exorbitant privilege. Others noticed. If there weren't enough ounces to match the paper, what exactly were they holding? This is how trust breaks. Not with panic, but with arithmetic. Too many claims. Not enough metal. The world was holding promises on something America no longer had. Comment below if you see the pattern faced with an impossible choice. Lose the gold or lose the system. A president made a decision in a single weekend that rewired money for good mid-August. 1971 Camp David, a closed-door meeting. Top advisors, no press. Not even the Fed chair was fully in the loop. The question was brutal in its simplicity. Honor the promise, surrender the gold, and watch American power drain away. Or break the promise and deal with the consequences later. Richard Nixon chose. He closed the gold window. Plain English. From that moment, foreign governments could no longer exchange their dollars for U.S. gold. The legal backbone of Bretton Woods snapped. The anchor was cut. On August 15th, Nixon went on television and called it a temporary suspension. But money has a way of making temporary permanent. Welcome to fiat currency. Money backed by nothing but belief. No metal, no limit. Just policy and perception. Markets reeled. If dollars weren't claims on gold, what were they worth? Answer. Whatever the world believed they were worth. Trust, newly divorced from substance, was now the whole game. The world had lost its compass, and didn't realize it yet. Trade continued. Inertia held. The machine kept moving, but the bearings had been removed. Friction was coming. Pause and think about that. With the anchor gone, discipline followed it out to sea. What happens next when printing becomes policy, and inflation becomes the bill? Once gold was gone, There were no brakes left on the machine. The printing presses roared to life. Deficits didn't matter anymore, and for a brief, intoxicating moment, it felt like free money, wars, welfare, and wages, all financed with paper. Washington could promise everything, because now it could create everything. But reality doesn't vanish when you print over it. It just hides. For a while, then the numbers started to show. Prices rising. Savings shrinking. The dollar's purchasing power began its long, quiet death spiral. The 1973 oil crisis hit like a thunderclap. Overnight, prices quadrupled. Gas lines stretched for miles. Not because oil had become scarce, but because dollars had become weak. The same paper that once commanded gold was now buying less of everything. Inflation hit double digits. Paychecks grew smaller by the month, and the American dream started to cost more than Americans could afford. Stagflation, a word no economist had used before, became the new normal. Growth stagnated. Prices soared. Confidence collapsed. The promise of endless prosperity had turned into the reality of endless debt. Every new dollar made the old ones worth less. By 1979, things had reached breaking point. The Federal Reserve appointed Paul Volcker, a man who believed pain was the only cure for paper money's disease. He slammed interest rates up to 21%. The economy choked. Businesses died. Families lost homes. But inflation finally broke. That was the trade-off. To make people believe in the dollar again, America had to break its own economy first. But Washington didn't just find discipline in pain. It found power in reinvention. If gold couldn't back the dollar, maybe something else could. Something the whole world needed. The world was still reeling from oil shocks, and the United States had an idea. A deal that would turn energy into leverage. America approached Saudi Arabia with an offer. The Saudis would price their oil only in U.S. dollars. In return, the U.S. would provide military protection and political backing for the kingdom. It was simple, ruthless, brilliant. From that moment on, every nation on earth that wanted oil, the lifeblood of modern civilization, had to first buy U.S. dollars, then use those dollars to buy oil. Demand was permanent. Dependence was locked in. The petrodollar was born. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by oil, guns, and global necessity. A new empire had been built, not of colonies or conquests, but of contracts and currency. America could now print money, and the world would absorb it. The deficits didn't matter because everyone needed dollars to survive. It was the perfect illusion. Limitless credit disguised as strength, and for any nation that dared to challenge it, there were consequences. Iraq tried to sell oil in euros. The invasion followed. Libya's Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency. He was removed, his nation shattered. Each time the message was clear: the dollar isn't just money. It's law. It wasn't economics anymore. It was empire by currency. But every empire built on paper must eventually face its own mathematics. Because printing prosperity doesn't create wealth. It just shifts who pays the price. From 1971 to today, one pattern has repeated like clockwork. A crisis hits. The government prints money. The economy stabilizes, for a moment. Then inflation rises. Debt piles higher, and the next crisis begins. The 1980s brought deregulation and debt. The 1990s brought the tech bubble. The 2000s brought the housing bubble. The 2020s, the everything bubble. Each collapse was patched with the same medicine: more dollars. Every fix made the system sicker. 2008 was the proof. Banks gambled trillions on subprime mortgages. When the bets went bad, the Federal Reserve didn't let them fall. It printed trillions to keep them alive. The result? Stocks soared. Real estate rebounded. But ordinary people, the ones without assets, got left behind. Then came 2020. Pandemic lockdowns. Trillions more printed overnight. Stimulus checks. Bailouts. Free money again. It looked like relief. But inflation followed like a shadow. You see, this is the hidden mechanism of modern finance. Every crisis is solved by printing. Every solution creates the next crisis. The rich own the assets. The rest own the inflation. Pause and think about that. We've built an economy that rewards those closest to the money printer and punishes everyone else trying to keep up. But outside America, the world is watching. And they've started asking a dangerous question. If the dollar can be printed without limit, why trust it at all? For 50 years, the world played by America's rules. Trade in dollars. Borrow in dollars. Save in dollars. But quietly, that obedience is cracking. China and Russia now trade in their own currencies. India is settling oil payments in rupees. Saudi Arabia, once the cornerstone of the petrodollar, is flirting with the idea of accepting yuan. Even U.S. allies are beginning to question the system.
Because every sanction, every financial weapon, every time Washington freezes a foreign nation's assets, it sends the same message. The dollar isn't neutral, it's a tool of control. And no one likes being controlled. So countries are building escape routes. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are developing alternatives to the dollar system. Central banks around the world are buying gold at record levels. Quietly, deliberately, like they know what's coming. The same arrogance that once built trust now breeds resistance. The same dollar that united the global economy is starting to divide it. And just like that, the unthinkable begins to look inevitable. A future where the dollar isn't king, just one currency among many. But here's the catch. Transitions like this don't happen overnight. They happen quietly. One deal, one defection, one central bank decision at a time. Until the day the world realizes the tide has already turned. And yet back home, America still feels untouchable. The dollar still buys oil, debt still gets funded, and markets still believe. But belief is a fragile thing. On the surface, the dollar looks powerful. The charts show strength. The headlines scream confidence. But beneath it all, the foundation is rotting. The U.S. national debt has crossed $34 trillion. Interest payments alone now rival what the nation spends on defense. Think about that. America spends as much servicing old debt as it does protecting itself. Every new dollar buys less than the last. Wages stagnate. Prices rise. Savings erode. And yet the printing continues. Politicians promise growth through spending. Central banks promise stability through manipulation. And the public, caught between the two, still believes it will somehow all work out. But it's a confidence game. The dollar hasn't collapsed yet because everyone's pretending it hasn't. Because the alternative, chaos, is too terrifying to face. But belief has a half-life. And once trust begins to decay, no policy can print it back into existence. It's the same story history has told 100 times before. Rome, Spain, Britain, each thought they could outsmart arithmetic. Each learned that you can't. The illusion of strength is the last stage before collapse. So the question now isn't if it ends, but how quietly it happens before everyone notices. 1971 wasn't just the end of gold. It was the end of restraint. The beginning of a slow-motion collapse built not on war or revolution, but on paper and promises. Every crisis since then, every inflation spike, every financial crash, has been the sound of that trust cracking a little more. Not a collapse of money itself, but a collapse of meaning. We're living in a system where value is defined by belief, and belief is fading. Where debt is infinite, but patience isn't. And where the world's reserve currency survives only because no one dares imagine what comes next. The collapse won't be sudden. It's already happening. Silently, invisibly, in slow motion. Pause for a moment. Look around. Every price you pay, every raise that doesn't keep up, every dollar that buys a little less than before, that's the story unfolding in real time. The silent collapse isn't coming. It's here. If this opened your eyes, subscribe. Because history doesn't repeat, it devalues.